Welcome. This is the 7th session of our study on the Book of Proverbs. We return to a new collection of the Proverbs of Solomon, primarily but not exclusively in the single verse, two-line style that we saw earlier in chapters 10 through 22. This collection has two main subunits, distinguishable primarily on the basis of genre. The first subunit is loaded with similes and metaphors, primarily similes. The second subunit has less imagery and frequently uses antithetical proverbs, especially those focused on the opposition of the righteous and the wicked. Today we will discuss chapters 25 through 28 of the Book of Proverbs. But we begin with a prayer. O God, our Father, open our eyes and enlighten our minds as we study your word. So grant that our minds may know your truth and our hearts may feel your love, and then confirm and strengthen our wills that we may go out to live what we have learned. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. The collection we begin in this session is referred to as These Also Are the Proverbs of Solomon, which the officials of King Hezekiah of Judah transcribed. The These Also in the first verse of this collection is an indicator that this section was appended to another section, maybe the first Proverbs of Solomon collection that we read in chapters 10 through 22:16. But the title verse tells us further that these proverbs were transcribed by the men or the officials of King Hezekiah of Judah. Hezekiah was king of the southern kingdom of Judah between 715 and 687 BCE, the period shortly after the northern kingdom of Israel was destroyed by the Assyrians in 722. Hezekiah was known for his obedience to God and instituted a number of political and religious reforms during his reign. These officials were probably scribes who collected, copied, or edited this group of proverbs. Although they were attributed to Solomon, again, it's not likely that many or even any of them were actually written by Solomon. We've said that this first subunit is filled with vivid similes and metaphors. It stretches from chapter 25 through chapter 27. We will also discuss the first half of the second subunit today and finish it in session 8. We will see a lot of one-verse proverbs in this section, but we also see some that are 2 or more verses in length. So let's start with the first 3 verses of chapter 25. These are the Proverbs of Solomon that the officials of King Hezekiah of Judah copied. It is the glory of God to conceal things, but the glory of kings is to search things out. Like the heavens for height, like the earth for depth, so the mind of kings is unsearchable. Early in this section, we see proverbs that seem to be designed to help us negotiate social and professional circles, such as how we should act around kings, for example. Verse 2 tells that God's purposes in history, nature, and individual lives is beyond our understanding. And furthermore, the hidden character of those purposes enhances our sense of divine power. The role of kings, on the other hand, is to sift out facts for the purposes of justice and policy. So this emphasis on kings and on the proper comportment before nobility probably reflects the concerns of the court scribes responsible for compiling this collection of proverbs. We're told in verse 3 that the king probes the heavens and the earth, but the heart of kings is out of bounds for probing. Let's go on to verse 4 through 7. Take away the dross from the silver, and the smith has material for a vessel. Take away the wicked from the presence of a king, and his throne will be established in righteousness. Do not put yourself forward in the king's presence, or stand in the place of the great. For it is better to be told, "Come up here," than to be put lower in the presence of a noble. That what your eyes have seen, do not hastily bring into court. For what will you do in the end when your neighbor puts you to shame? Verses 4 and 5 use the metaphor of removing scum from silver and comparing that with removing the wicked from the presence of the king. Verses 6 and 7 remind us of Jesus' admonition in Luke 14:8 to not sit in the place of honor at the wedding banquet, if you remember that one. The final line of verse 7 is confusing. It's not clear if the first word is whom and goes with verse 7, making it, "For it is better to be told, 'Come up here,' than to be put lower in the presence of a noble whom your eyes have seen. Do not hastily go into court, for what will you do in the end when your neighbor puts you to shame?" Or, if it goes with verse 8 and uses the word "what," "For it is better to be told, 'Come up here,' than to be put lower in the presence of a noble. What your eyes have seen, do not hastily bring into court. For what will you do in the end when your neighbor puts you to shame?" Let's go on with verses 9 and 10. "Argue your case with your neighbor directly, and do not disclose another secret, or else someone who hears you will bring shame upon you, and your ill repute will have no end." So listen to the similes in these next few verses. As a reminder, a simile draws a correspondence between two things by using the explicit formula like or as. He is like a tree planted by streams of water. We will see lots of the use of the word like in these proverbs. The metaphor leaves out the word like and just says A is B. The Lord is my shepherd. We may occasionally see some metaphors, but the similes just jump out at us. So look for the word like, especially in these next few verses. Verse 11. "A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in a setting of silver. Like a gold ring or an ornament of gold is a wise rebuke to a listening ear. Like the cold of snow in the time of harvest are faithful messengers to those who send them. They refresh the spirit of their masters. Like clouds and winds without rain is one who boasts of a gift never given." Let's go on with verses 15 through 17. "With patience a ruler may be persuaded, and a soft tongue can break bones. If you have found honey, eat only enough for you, lest having too much you vomit it up. Let your foot be seldom in your neighbor's house, lest the neighbor become weary of you and hate you." So now this next section, we're going to have some more similes, several similes in here, verse 18 through 20. "Like a war club, a sword, or a sharp arrow is one who bears false witness against a neighbor. Like a bad tooth or a lame foot is trust in a faithless person in time of trouble. Like vinegar on a wound is one who sings songs to a heavy heart. Like a moth in clothing or a worm in wood, sorrow gnaws at the human heart." Verses 21 through 23. "If your enemies are hungry, give them bread to eat. And if they are thirsty, give them water to drink. For you will heap coals of fire on their heads, and the Lord will reward you. The north wind produces rain, and a backbiting tongue angry looks." We saw verse 24 in chapter 21, verse 9. So here's 24. See if you remember this one. "It is better to live in a corner of the housetop than in a house shared with a contentious wife." And now this chapter closes with a series of similes again. "Like cold water to a thirsty soul, so is good news from a far country. Like a muddied spring or a polluted fountain are the righteous who give way before the wicked. It is not good to eat much honey or to seek honor on top of honor. Like a city breached without walls is one who lacks self-control." In verse 28, it would have been clear to the ancient audience how vulnerable a city would be without fortified walls. We don't have a lot of fortified walls around our cities today, but they did then. So a man of unrestrained spirit is seen as making himself painfully vulnerable to humiliation or to harm. Chapter 26 brings us back to the fool again. We see again a number of similes, especially in these two of the first three verses here. So, verse 1. "Like snow in summer or rain in harvest, so honor is not fitting for a fool. Like a sparrow in its flitting, like a swallow in its flying, an undeserved curse goes nowhere. A whip for the horse, a bridle for the donkey, and a rod for the back of fools." A lot of scholars have put an extraordinary effort into making sense of the next two verses. Why do you think these directly contradictory proverbs appear back to back in this chapter? Let's read these, verses 4 and 5. Do not answer fools according to their folly, lest you be a fool yourself. And then 5. Answer fools according to their folly, lest they be wise in their own eyes. Read those again. They're exactly the opposite. One, they exactly contradict each other. Do not answer fools according to their folly, lest you be a fool yourself. And answer fools according to their folly, lest they be wise in their own eyes. So it's plausible that they were bracketed together because of a similarity of the formulation, but they represent two quite different and originally independent perspectives. There may be some times when we should answer fools according to their folly, and other times when we should not. Truly wise readers can discern the difference, so you figure that out. Next, we discuss fools within the genre of simile again. See some more simile here. Verse 6. It is like cutting off one's foot and drinking down violence to send a message by a fool. The legs of a lame person hang limp, so does a proverb in the mouth of a fool. It is like binding a stone in a sling to give honor to a fool. Like a thorn bush brandished by the hand of a drunkard is a proverb in the mouth of a fool. Like an archer who wounds everybody is one who hires a passing fool or drunkard. Like a dog that returns to its vomit is a fool who reverts to his folly. Interesting, all about fools. Verse 12. Do you see people wise in their own eyes? There is more hope for fools than for them. Now we return to the lazy bones. Verse 13 is a variation on one of the lazy people we met in session 6. The lazy person says, there is a lion in the road. There is a lion in the streets. So there's some more laziness in the next few verses. As a door turns on its hinges, so does a lazy person in bed. Lazy person just rolls on over and goes back to sleep. The lazy person buries a hand in the dish and is too tired to bring it back to the mouth. Too tired, too lazy just to even eat. The lazy person is wiser in self-esteem than 7 who can answer discreetly. Verses 14 and 15, I think we've heard those before. A little bit different, but close. A couple more lazy similes are next. Like someone who takes a passing dog by the ears is one who meddles in the quarrel of another. Like a maniac who shoots deadly firebrands and arrows, so is one who deceives a neighbor and says, I am only joking. Let's look at 20 through 22. For lack of wood, the fire goes out, and where there is no whisperer, quarreling ceases. As charcoal is to hot embers and wood to fire, so is a quarrelsome person for kindling strife. The words of a whisperer are like delicious morsels. They go down into the inner parts of the body. So the whisperer in verse 22 here sounds exactly like the whisperer in verse 8 of chapter 18. Look at these. They're just identical. We read 23 through the end of the chapter. Like the glaze covering an earthen vessel or smooth lips with an evil heart, an enemy dissembles in speaking while harboring deceit within. When an enemy speaks graciously, do not believe it, for there are 7 abominations concealed within. Though hatred is covered with guile, the enemy's wickedness will be exposed in the assembly. Whoever digs a pit will fall into it, and a stone will come back on the one who starts it rolling. A lying tongue hates its victims, and a flattering mouth works ruin. Verse 28 describes a liar who hates the victim. This is a common psychological mechanism in which the victimizer hates or despises the very person to whom he wrongs, perhaps feeling contempt because the victim has so pathetically exposed himself to harm. So in chapter 27, the Proverbs mostly seem to be of the 1 verse 2 line variety, again with a few exceptions. We have a variety of topics, some of which stretch on for a few verses, but not so much the Proverbs. That is, the topics stretch on, the individual Proverbs, the individual verses seem to be mostly one proverb each. Friendship is one theme that we see repeatedly in this chapter. So we start with verses 1 and 2. Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring. Let another person praise you and not your own mouth, a stranger and not your own lips. Verses 3 and 4 can be made into riddles. These are the better than proverbs. A stone is heavy and sand is weighty, but a fool's provocation is heavier than both. So what is heavier than a stone and sand? A fool's provocation. Wrath is cruel. Anger is overwhelming, but who is able to stand before jealousy? Verse 5, better is open rebuke than hidden love. Better than. Let's read verse 6. Well meant are the wounds a friend inflicts, but profuse are the kisses of an enemy. So the wounds here probably mean something like cutting words of rebuke. They are faithful in that they are meant to serve one's best interest. They contrast with hypocritical kisses of an enemy. Let's read verses 7 through 10. The sated appetite spurns honey, but to a ravenous appetite, even the bitter is sweet. Like a bird that strays from its nest is one who strays from home. Perfume and incense make the heart glad, but the soul is torn by trouble. Do not forsake your friend or the friend of your parent. Do not go to the house of your kindred in the day of your calamity. Better is a neighbor who is nearby than kindred who are far away. The second part of verse 10 appears to be a separate proverb. It may be bracketed with the previous one because of the comparison of a friend and kindred or brother, but they seem to be separate proverbs. Better is a neighbor who is nearby than kindred who are far away. Let's go on with verse 11 through 14. And these all seem to be separate proverbs here. Be wise, my child, and make my heart glad, so that I may answer whoever reproaches me. The clever see danger and hide, but the simple go on and suffer for it. Take the garment of one who is given surety for a stranger. Seize the pledge given as surety for foreigners. Whoever blesses a neighbor with a loud voice rising early in the morning will be counted as cursing. There's a little humor here in verse 14. Whoever blesses a neighbor with a loud voice rising early in the morning. When you're barely awake in the morning, the last thing you want is a bellowed and perhaps ostentatious greeting from a neighbor. 15 and 16. A continual dripping on a rainy day and a contentious wife are alike. To restrain her is to restrain the wind or to grasp oil in the right hand. Apparently the Hebrew in verse 16 is unintelligible. The New Revised Standard Version assumes the her in verse 16 refers to the nagging wife in verse 15. The idea is that it's impossible to hide or contain her because she is everywhere like the wind. The literal meaning of the second line is, and the oil of his right hand will call or be called. The oil of his right hand will call or be called, which doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. The New Revised Standard Version translates this as, or to grasp oil in the right hand. It could be, and her name is called right hand. She's like the right hand man. Or she could be thought of as right hand because she is powerful, because there is no way to conceal and repress her. She's very strong right hand. Verses 17 through 21. Iron sharpens iron, and one person sharpens the wits of another. Anyone who tends a fig tree will eat its fruit, and anyone who takes care of a master will be honored. Just as water reflects the face, so one human heart reflects another. Sheol and Abaddon are never satisfied, and human eyes are never satisfied. The crucible is for silver and the furnace for gold, so a person is tested by being praised. Verse 21 tells us that a man's reputation tests him, burns out the dross as a smelter tries gold or silver. Verses 22 through 24. Crush a fool in a mortar with a pestle, along with crushed grain, but the folly will not be driven out. Know well the condition of your flocks, and give attention to your herds. For riches do not last forever, nor a crown for all generations. Verses 25 through 27 can be tied together. When the grass is gone and new growth appears, and the herbage of the mountains is gathered, the lambs will provide your clothing, and the goats the price of a field. There will be enough goat's milk for your food, for the food of your household, and nourishment for your female servants. So the grass is vital for feeding the flocks. So it's important that there is new growth each year. And the sheep and the goats are important to feed and clothe the household. Hence, we need new growth of grass as part of this cycle to sustain our lives. Here ends chapter 27. This is also the end of the first subunit of this collection of Proverbs. The second subunit consists of chapters 28 and 29. We'll cover 28 in this session and 29 in our next session. The opening and closing Proverbs of this subunit are both antithetical. Both concern the opposition of the righteous and the wicked. There is also a persistent concern in this section for the government, for just government especially, and for the abuse of authority. A second theme of instruction of the wise here, and perhaps God's law. We'll hear about transgressions or crimes quite a bit in this section, especially in chapter 28. So let's begin chapter 28, the first verse. The wicked flee when no one pursues them, but the righteous are as bold as a lion. The wicked are plagued by a guilty conscience, live in constant fear of divine retribution or legal punishment or whatever, whereas the righteous live in confidence. They have nothing to fear. Verses 2 through 5. When a land rebels, it has many rulers, but with an intelligent person, honesty endures. A poor person who oppresses the poor is beating rain that leaves no food. Those who forsake the law praise the wicked, but those who keep the law struggle against them. The evil do not understand justice, but those who seek the Lord understand it completely. So verse 3 is kind of interesting here. Even a poor person can exploit other disadvantaged people, or perhaps be used as a tool by the powerful to exploit them. The beating of rain that leaves no food is also kind of interesting. Rain, as a rule, waters the soil, enabling grain to grow. A torrential rain washes away the soil, making the growth of grain impossible, and that's what it seems to be describing here in verse 3. A poor person who opposes the poor is beating rain that leaves no food. Let's read verses 6 through 10. Better to be poor and walk in integrity than to be crooked in one's ways, even though rich. Those who keep the law are wise children, but companions of gluttons shame their parents. One who augments wealth by exorbitant interest gathers it for another who is kind to the poor. When one will not listen to the law, even one's prayers are an abomination. Those who mislead the upright into evil ways will fall into pits of their own making, but the blameless will have a goodly inheritance. So let's read 11 and 12. The rich is wise in self-esteem, but an intelligent poor person sees through the pose. When the righteous rejoice, there is great glory, but when the wicked prevail, people go into hiding. Second part of verse 12 can be translated, when the wicked rise up, man dons disguises. The Hebrew verb is ya'apas, which can mean will be sought for. Under the regime of the wicked, decent people are hard to find, so they go into hiding. But it can also mean is disguised, forced to disguise themselves for self-protection for some reason. When the righteous rejoice, there is great glory, but when the wicked prevail, people go into hiding. Let's go with verse 13 through 17. No one who conceals transgressions will prosper, but one who confesses and forsakes them will obtain mercy. Happy is the one who is never without fear, but one who is hard-hearted will fall into calamity. Like a roaring lion or a charging bear is a wicked ruler over poor people. A ruler who lacks understanding is a cruel oppressor, but one who hates unjust gain will enjoy a long life. If someone is burdened with blood of another, Let that killer be a fugitive until death. Let no one offer assistance. So we see wicked rulers and those who assist him in these verses. So let's go on with 18 through 21. One who walks in integrity will be safe, but whoever follows crooked ways will fall into the pit. Anyone who tills the land will have plenty of bread, but one who follows worthless pursuits will have plenty of poverty. The faithful will abound with blessings, but one who is in a hurry to be rich will not go unpunished. To show partiality is not good, yet for a piece of bread a person may do wrong. Let's look at verse 21 again. To show partiality is not good, yet for a piece of bread a person may do wrong. If the first line suggests here that in justice one should not show partiality to the rich and powerful, then the second line may mean that a judge should also have compassion for a poor man who may have stolen bread out of sheer desperate hunger. Let's look at verses 22 through 26. The miser is in a hurry to get rich and does not know that loss is sure to come. Whoever rebukes a person will afterward find more favor than one who flatters with the tongue. Anyone who robs father or mother says, "That is no crime," is a partner to a thug. The greedy person stirs up strife, but whoever trusts in the Lord will be enriched. Those who trust in their own wits are fools. Those who walk in wisdom come through safely. So verse 26 is considered an example of an elliptical proverb. Those who trust in their own wits are fools. Literally, it says, one who trusts in his own heart is a fool. We go from trusting to walking in the second half of this, but those who walk in wisdom come through safely. So it's an elliptical proverb because it leaves out what it is that the wise come through safely. We need to supply that part. We're supposed to figure that out from the context. The wise man will escape from trouble, but the fool will not escape from trouble. That's what we're supposed to figure out, I guess. Verses 27 and 28. Whoever gives to the poor will lack nothing, but one who turns a blind eye will get many a curse. When the wicked prevail, people go into hiding, but when they perish, the righteous increase. So the first half of 28 is identical to the back half of verse 12 earlier in this chapter. 28 says, when the wicked prevail, people go into hiding, but when they perish, the righteous increase. Verse 12, earlier in this chapter, when the righteous rejoice, there is great glory, but when the wicked prevail, people go into hiding. So here we end chapter 28. In our next session, we'll discuss chapter 29, which is a continuation of this collection of Proverbs of Solomon, transcribed during the reign of Hezekiah. We'll also look at chapter 30, the words of Agur, and chapter 31, the words of Lemuel, king of Massa, which his mother taught him, and also the woman of substance. Until then, have a good week. Hope to see you Sunday.